Failure, as it's commonly understood, is far too often interpreted as a verdict, a final statement about your worth, your abilities, or your potential. But that interpretation is deeply flawed. It's also dangerous because it leads to paralysis. People internalize a loss as a defining trait rather than a momentary condition. And once you do that, you no longer treat it as something correctable. You turn something external and temporary into something internal and permanent. You need to be very precise about this. Failure is information. It's a signal from reality that something you did or something you believed or something you assumed wasn't sufficient, and reality doesn't lie. If you set out to accomplish something and fall short, that shortfall contains the blueprint for your improvement, not just in terms of technical skill, but in terms of maturity, character, and understanding. So it's not just a mark of insufficiency, it's an opportunity to recalibrate your relationship with the world, but only if you're paying attention. And attention is everything, because most people don't look closely at their failures. They flinch, they retreat, they distract themselves, or assign blame. They do anything but investigate. But the path forward is found through brutal self-honesty. You need to dissect the event, ask the difficult questions. What did I overlook? What did I refuse to prepare for? What weakness in my character contributed to this? And that process of analysis is not cruelty, it's necessity. The ego resists this. It always does, because to admit fault, to admit error, is to acknowledge vulnerability, and vulnerability feels like danger. But here's the paradox. Avoiding the truth of failure is far more dangerous, because what you refuse to confront becomes what controls you. The more you deny the lessons embedded in defeat, the more likely you are to repeat the same outcome. And life, if ignored, becomes louder, not quieter. Its feedback becomes more painful, not less. Failure, when rightly framed, is a mirror. It doesn't just show you what went wrong in the world, it shows you what's fragmented within yourself. Your assumptions, your preparedness, your courage, your discipline, they're all laid bare, and it's humiliating. But humility is the beginning of wisdom. You must allow the experience of falling short to reduce you, to strip away what is false or insufficient, so something stronger can emerge. That is not defeat, that is refinement. The people who genuinely grow, are the ones who adopt failure as a necessary component of progress. They don't romanticize it, but they don't fear it either. They approach it like a craftsman would a broken tool. They inspect it, figure out what failed, and learn how to build better. It's a skill, and like all skills, it develops with practice. The more honestly you fail, the more accurately you can reorient. And accuracy matters because life punishes deception, especially the self-imposed kind. But this requires the courage to take personal responsibility. That's the dividing line. You either look outward and blame, or you look inward and grow. One leads to bitterness and stagnation, the other to adaptation and strength. It's a moral decision, because learning from failure means admitting you were not yet who you needed to be, and that's painful. But pain is the cost of growth, and the alternative is far worse, remaining exactly as you are, despite all the evidence that you could be more. The world is undeniably filled with suffering, injustice, and arbitrary misfortune. Terrible things happen to people, some born into chaos, others struck down despite their best efforts. And it is easy, seductively easy, to take these facts and adopt a posture of victimhood, to declare, "This is not my fault," and from that declaration to justify bitterness, resentment, and paralysis. But what you have to understand is this: while your circumstances may not be your fault, your response to them is absolutely your responsibility. That distinction is critical. It marks the difference between someone who decays and someone who transforms. Victimhood, when internalized, becomes a psychological prison. It breeds entitlement, and entitlement is the death of ambition. If you believe the world owes you fairness or comfort or recognition simply because you've suffered, then you are destined to remain where you are, because nothing will ever be enough. And the bitter irony is that while you cling to the identity of the victim to protect yourself from pain, what you actually do is increase your vulnerability. You give the power of your story away. You become reactive instead of proactive, passive instead of purposeful. Taking responsibility, in contrast, is a radical act. It is not the same as accepting blame. It's about voluntarily confronting the fact that, despite everything, you still have choices. You can take action, however small. You can improve your habits, your posture, your speech, your competence, incrementally but meaningfully. And when you do that, you regain control of your life. Responsibility is not a burden. It is the means by which you reclaim dignity, and dignity is the foundation of psychological strength. This doesn't mean denying the reality of trauma or oppression. It means refusing to let those realities dictate the entirety of your existence. Because if all you are is a product of what's happened to you, then you are little more than a puppet of circumstance. But if you can stand up in the face of suffering, if you can say, "I will carry what is mine to carry," then you assert your agency. You defy chaos. And that act, simple, quiet, often unseen, is the essence of heroism, because responsibility begins where victimhood ends. No one becomes stronger by outsourcing accountability. It's in the act of picking up what is heavy, emotionally, spiritually, practically, that you become capable. And the truth is, you already know where you're not living up to your potential. You can feel it. That aching sense of guilt or shame or restlessness, that's your conscience. And it's not your enemy. It's your internal compass urging you toward responsibility, toward meaning, toward the life you could be living if only you'd stop telling yourself that it's all someone else's fault. You must choose between comfort and growth. The identity of the victim may provide emotional shelter, but it extracts a terrible cost, the forfeiture of your potential. Responsibility is harsh. It demands sacrifice, effort, self-discipline, and relentless honesty. But in that process, you gain something priceless, self-respect, and self-respect cannot be faked. It comes only from confronting the parts of yourself you least want to see and deciding to do better anyway. That's how transformation occurs, through voluntary struggle, not coerced safety. There is something deeply noble in bearing your suffering with integrity, in choosing to improve, not because the world is fair, but because it is not. And in doing so, you become a stabilizing force, not just in your own life, but in the lives of others. People are starving for examples of strength, for models of responsibility. And when you take responsibility, you provide that example. Not through grand gestures, but through consistency, through order, through the refusal to collapse into self-pity. Discipline is not about restriction, it's about structure. It's the voluntary acceptance of necessary constraints in service of something higher than immediate gratification. People think freedom means doing whatever you want, whenever you want. But that's not freedom, that's chaos. And chaos will consume you if it's not ordered properly. True freedom comes when you impose order on your impulses, when you master yourself rather than being mastered by your desires. Transformation doesn't happen by accident. It is not an event, it's a process. And that process is built on consistent, disciplined action over time. People fantasize about radical change, some sudden shift in identity that will alter everything, but it doesn't work like that. What changes you is the decision to wake up early, to make your bed, to study when you'd rather scroll, to train when your body resists. Each act of discipline is a brick, and character is built brick by brick. There is nothing glamorous about discipline. It is often tedious, repetitive, and thankless. No one applauds you for saying no to distraction or for choosing discomfort when comfort is available. But that's precisely where its value lies, in the fact that it's hard, because it means that very few people will do it. And if you can, then you begin to separate yourself, not in a prideful way, but in a way that reflects the emergence of strength. Discipline is earned, not given. And discipline is not just about behavior, it's about orientation. It's about deciding deeply what kind of person you want to become, and then aligning your actions with that aim. That means sacrifice, that means delayed gratification, that means doing things you don't want to do because you know at some level they are necessary. Necessary for order, necessary for progress, necessary for meaning. Without that orientation, even your discipline becomes directionless. There's a reason why ancient traditions elevate discipline as a virtue. It is what holds chaos at bay. It's what allows you to carry the burdens of life without collapsing. People admire those who are composed, focused, and capable, but what they often fail to see is the foundation beneath that composure, a life organized around habits that were chosen, not inherited. Discipline is the daily act of saying no to weakness and yes to responsibility, even when no one is watching. And let's not pretend this is easy. It's not. You will fail. You will break your own rules. You will fall into laziness and distraction and despair, but that doesn't disqualify you, because discipline isn't perfection. It's perseverance. It's the capacity to begin again, to return to the path after you've strayed. Every time you recommit, you reinforce your identity as someone who takes themselves seriously, as someone who is becoming, not passively, but purposefully. Discipline also brings clarity. When your life is structured, your thinking becomes sharper. Your emotions become more stable. You know where your time goes, and therefore you know where your life is going. You are no longer ruled by fleeting moods or shallow preferences. You are governed by values. And values, when embodied, give you strength because they are rooted in something deeper than circumstance. And you begin to see yourself as someone reliable, even in chaos. The transformation discipline brings is not external first. It's internal. It reshapes how you view yourself, how you speak, how you stand, how you relate to others. You begin to realize that success is not an accident. It's earned in private long before it's revealed in public. And what's most powerful is this: the disciplined person becomes someone others can rely on, not because they're lucky or talented or charismatic, but because they do what is difficult consistently without complaint. Adversity is one of the few things in life that is guaranteed. It arrives uninvited, often when you are least prepared, and it doesn't ask for permission. And yet, within adversity lies something paradoxical, an opportunity for meaning that ease can never provide. Comfort numbs you. Adversity sharpens you. It draws out the parts of you that otherwise remain dormant. You don't know how much you can endure until you're forced to, and when you endure, you are changed. The instinctive response to suffering is to ask, "Why me?" But that question left unanswered becomes corrosive. It turns into bitterness, envy, and despair. The better question, the transformative one, is what is this asking of me? Because meaning is not found in the avoidance of pain, but in the confrontation with it, in your willingness to carry it voluntarily with dignity and integrity. And when you choose to carry it, you begin to integrate strength into your identity. Adversity is a mirror. It shows you what you are, and perhaps more importantly, what you are not. It reveals the cracks in your character, the places where you rely too much on circumstance or on others or on comfort, and it forces a reckoning. Will you stay fragmented, or will you begin to forge something solid from what has been shattered? That decision to stand amidst the ruins and build anyway, that's where meaning begins to take form, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. There is a reason why the stories that endure, the myths, the scriptures, the literature, are filled with suffering. The hero suffers not in spite of their greatness, but because of it. And what redeems their pain is the fact that it's not wasted. It becomes the forge in which wisdom is made. The pain endured voluntarily transforms into strength, and that strength becomes a gift not just for the individual, but for the community. That is how meaning transcends the self. It becomes service. When you suffer, you have two paths: collapse or climb. Collapse is easier. It requires nothing but resignation. But the climb, the decision to respond to adversity with order, purpose, and responsibility, that's the path of transformation. And that path is not walked in ideal conditions. It's walked through fear, confusion, exhaustion, and grief. But it's real, and the person you become on that path is forged in the fire that others flee from. The deepest forms of meaning emerge when you take what is unbearable and make it bearable, for yourself and perhaps for someone else. You become someone who can stand in tragedy and still say yes to life. That doesn't mean the suffering disappears. It means it no longer owns you. You begin to act not out of fear, but out of conviction. And that conviction gives you direction in a world that is chaotic, uncertain, and cruel. It becomes a light, however small, that cuts through the darkness. Suffering without meaning is unbearable, but suffering with meaning, chosen meaning, is redemptive. It doesn't erase the hardship, but it frames it. It places the pain inside a narrative that says, there is something to be learned here, something to be built here, someone I can become here. That narrative gives you strength, not imaginary, not abstract, but lived strength. The kind that sustains you when everything else falls away, the kind that reveals your capacity for endurance. There is a fundamental law embedded in the structure of life. Nothing of value is achieved without effort. And not just effort imposed from the outside, but struggle you choose. Voluntary struggle. That is where growth begins, because what you do voluntarily, you do with purpose. You align yourself with the demands of reality rather than waiting for it to crush you. And in doing so, you begin to shape yourself into something resilient, competent, and formidable. Comfort, while attractive, is deceptive. It whispers to you that you are fine as you are, that you deserve rest before you've earned it, that challenge is optional, but growth doesn't happen in ease. It happens at the boundary between order and chaos, where the known meets the unknown. And when you voluntarily step into that space, you engage with the forces that shape character. You learn who you are. You learn what you're made of. And you stop being a bystander in your own becoming. Struggle that is forced upon you can still produce strength, but it's often marred by resentment. Voluntary struggle is different. It's a decision to confront what is difficult because you know there is something on the other side of it that is worth the cost. You train your body not because it's fun, but because it's necessary. You discipline your mind not because it's easy, but because it's right. That decision, to take on the burden before it crushes you, makes you stronger than the burden itself. And the act of struggle clarifies your values. It forces you to prioritize what matters over what merely feels good, because struggle strips away illusion. When you voluntarily suffer for a goal, you begin to understand what that goal really means. You see whether it's worth the fight. And in that refinement, your aim becomes more accurate, your commitment more durable. You begin to live with intentionality rather than drifting aimlessly from one pleasure to the next. What you avoid will grow stronger in the shadows, but what you face voluntarily, you can master, you can integrate it, you can grow from it. The mountain doesn't shrink because you complain, but if you climb it step by painful step, you will change. Your legs will strengthen, your lungs will adapt, and eventually you'll look back and realize that the person who began the journey is no longer the person standing there. Struggle is the mechanism of transformation. Voluntary struggle also generates respect, first from yourself, then from others, because deep down people know what is easy and what is earned. When you face hardship by choice, you develop integrity, you develop competence, you develop the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to be shouted. And that becomes attractive, not in the superficial sense, but in the deeply human sense. People trust those who have suffered and chosen to return to the fight. Struggle makes life meaningful because it attaches you to something beyond yourself. It places your suffering in service to a cause, a responsibility, a future version of you who depends on today's effort. And that connection to something greater than your present comfort is what makes sacrifice noble. You can give something up today because you know that doing so makes tomorrow better, not just for you, but for those around you. That's how the individual becomes a force for order. The refusal to engage in voluntary struggle is a refusal to grow. And though it may buy you comfort in the short term, it robs you of fulfillment in the long term, because you will always feel the difference between who you are and who you could be. That tension doesn't go away. It intensifies. But if you choose to struggle, if you pick up the weight and walk forward regardless of how heavy it feels, then you begin to close that gap. You move closer to who you are meant to become. Failure is not the end. It is the beginning of something else, something deeper, something more authentic. When you fail, something in you breaks, yes, but something else opens. That opening is painful, but it's also instructive. It reveals the limits of your current competence. It exposes the flaws in your assumptions. It tells you, in no uncertain terms, that there is still something to be learned, something you've missed, something demanding your attention. People often fear failure because they think it defines them, but that's a lie. Failure only defines you if you let it. What it actually does, if you pay attention, is refine you. It's a form of feedback, and like all feedback, it can be used. But you have to be honest. You have to ask, where did I go wrong? What did I ignore? Where was I weak? That's not self-hatred. That's self-awareness, and self-awareness is the root of maturity. The most successful individuals you admire, they've all failed, repeatedly, painfully, publicly. But what distinguishes them is not perfection. It's their refusal to let failure have the last word. They treated it as data, as correction, as a painful but necessary part of growth. And through that process, they developed resilience. Not fake confidence, not bravado, but real earned confidence grounded in the knowledge that they can recover, learn, and re-engage stronger. Failure, properly understood, humbles you. It strips you of arrogance and forces you to confront what is real. It shows you that you are not yet who you think you are, and that truth hurts. But it's also a gift because now you have a direction. You can revise your aim. You can tighten your discipline. You can dig deeper into the foundations of your character. And in doing so, you start to build something that is not easily broken. What's dangerous is not failure. It's the refusal to face it. It's the ego that cannot accept imperfection. The person who denies their mistakes is doomed to repeat them. But the person who embraces failure as part of the learning process becomes invincible in a different way. They stop fearing loss. They stop fearing judgment. They become committed not to the illusion of success, but to the reality of progress. And that shift is profound. You must not treat failure as a verdict. It is not a moral indictment. It is not proof that you are inadequate in some permanent sense. It is simply a consequence of aiming high and falling short. And if you don't aim, you don't fail, but you also don't grow. It's better to fail at something difficult than to succeed at something trivial, because in that failure lies the blueprint for who you could become if you're willing to confront the discomfort and keep going. Failure also teaches you empathy. It softens your judgments of others. Once you've fallen, truly fallen, you're less quick to condemn. You begin to understand that everyone is struggling with something, and in that shared struggle, there's a kind of unspoken brotherhood. A recognition that we are all works in progress, that we're all stumbling towards something better, and that recognition can transform not only how you see yourself, but how you treat others. There's a nobility in persistence, in standing back up when it would be easier to stay down, in reviewing your failures not with shame but with curiosity. Because the person who can stare failure in the face and extract wisdom from it, that person becomes dangerous in the best sense. They cannot be easily discouraged. They cannot be broken by setbacks. They've turned failure into fuel, and that fuel becomes the engine of long-term success. Purpose is the anchor in the storm. Without it, life's chaos will overwhelm you. When everything feels uncertain and the ground beneath your feet shifts, purpose offers a direction, a reason to continue despite difficulty. It is more than just a goal or an ambition. It is the organizing principle of your existence. Purpose pulls you forward, giving your struggles meaning and your sacrifices a reason. Without it, resilience fades because you have nothing worth enduring for. The problem many face is that purpose is not handed to you on a silver platter. It must be discovered, created, and refined over time. It demands honesty about your strengths, your weaknesses, and what truly matters to you. People often confuse purpose with pleasure or immediate success, but purpose requires long-term commitment and sometimes sacrifice. It asks you to stand up when you'd rather lie down, to push forward when everything screams retreat. Resilience without purpose is like a ship adrift at sea, strong in its build but lacking direction. Purpose gives resilience a target. It transforms suffering from meaningless pain into a challenge worth facing. When you have a purpose, the weight of adversity becomes a call to action, not a reason to surrender. It fuels your persistence, your capacity to bear hardship, and your willingness to endure setbacks. Purpose transforms you from a passive victim of circumstance into an active agent of your own fate. Moreover, purpose connects you to something greater than yourself. It can be a responsibility to others, a commitment to a cause, or a vision for a future better than the present. This connection provides a reservoir of strength, especially when your own reserves run dry. Purpose creates a context in which suffering is not just endured, but transcended. It allows you to see your efforts as part of a larger narrative, giving coherence and significance to your daily struggles. Without purpose, life can feel fragmented, disjointed, and exhausting. Tasks become chores, relationships lose depth, and motivation wanes. Purpose integrates these disparate elements into a cohesive whole. It acts as a compass, guiding decisions and actions even in the darkest times. This guidance is not always clear or easy, but it is reliable because it is rooted in values that transcend fleeting emotions or external rewards. Purpose is the light that illuminates the path through confusion. Resilience built on purpose is durable because it is sustained by meaning. When you know why you're enduring difficulty, you can tolerate far more than you otherwise would. Purpose reframes suffering as a necessary component of growth rather than an obstacle to be avoided. It encourages you to embrace challenge rather than evade it. And this embrace of challenge, grounded in meaning, is what ultimately transforms weakness into strength and despair into hope. Purpose is also deeply personal. It cannot be imposed from outside or borrowed from others without losing its power. You must wrestle with your own values, experiences, and aspirations to find what truly drives you. This wrestling is difficult, sometimes painful, but necessary. Without that struggle, purpose becomes hollow, a mere slogan rather than a lived reality. And when purpose is authentic, it resonates with the deepest parts of your being, energizing you even when circumstances are bleak. Finally, purpose demands ongoing commitment and adaptation. Life will challenge your sense of direction repeatedly, and you must be willing to revise your purpose as you grow and learn. This flexibility is not weakness, but wisdom. It reflects an understanding that resilience is not rigid endurance, but dynamic engagement. Purpose sustains resilience by continually renewing your motivation and sharpening your focus, allowing you to navigate the inevitable storms with determination and grace. Success is often misunderstood as a fixed point, a place you arrive at, a trophy you earn, or a status you achieve. But this view is superficial and misleading. Success is not a destination you reach and then rest. It is a journey that unfolds over time, a continuous process of becoming rather than a final accomplishment. Understanding success this way frees you from the tyranny of perfection and the paralysis of fear that often accompanies it. When you think of success as a journey, every step matters. It means that your daily habits, your small decisions, and your consistent actions are what truly shape your path. Success is built incrementally, brick by brick, and it is the routine, the discipline, and the perseverance that accumulate into something substantial. This perspective shifts your focus from fleeting outcomes to the process itself, which is where growth and fulfillment reside. The journey of success is marked by challenges, setbacks, and failures, not by the absence of these things. To view success as a destination is to imagine a smooth, linear progression. But life is never so simple. Instead, success demands resilience, the capacity to continue moving forward despite obstacles and defeats. This resilience is cultivated through engagement with the journey itself, learning from each failure and adapting to each new circumstance as it arises. Success as a journey requires patience. It demands that you tolerate uncertainty and discomfort over the long term, resisting the urge for immediate gratification. In a culture obsessed with speed and instant results, this can feel counterintuitive. But meaningful success that transforms you and your life, requires time. It requires a willingness to stay committed to a vision, even when progress seems invisible or slow. Importantly, this journey is also deeply personal. Your success will not look like anyone else's. Comparing your path to others' destinations is a recipe for frustration and despair. Instead, success must be defined in terms of your own values, your own potential, and your own sense of purpose. When you embrace this individuality, the journey becomes not just about achievement, but about authentic self-expression and growth. Success as a journey also demands humility. It requires acknowledging that you do not have all the answers and that you must be open to learning continually. This means listening to feedback, admitting mistakes, and being willing to change course when necessary. It means understanding that success is not a static state of arrival, but an ongoing dialogue between who you are and who you are becoming. The journey invites you to live fully in the present moment while keeping your eyes on the horizon. It is a balance of engagement and anticipation, engagement with the work at hand and anticipation of the future you are building. This balance sustains motivation and fosters a sense of meaning that is richer than any final achievement. It transforms success into a way of living rather than a mere goal to be checked off. Ultimately, success understood as a journey cultivates resilience, purpose, and growth. It teaches you that fulfillment arises not from reaching an end point, but from the continual process of striving, learning, and becoming. This understanding shifts your identity from a passive recipient of fate to an active participant in your own transformation, forever engaged in the lifelong journey of making yourself more than you were yesterday.